Good morning, every people. So I'm your host with the most, Pirate Master Deadpool Supreme, here with another live exclusive episode of Chillin with the Pool. As you've probably read in the episode's description, this month actually marks the 75th anniversary of Disney's animated classic Cinderella. That's right, it came out a few days ago in the year of 1950, thus kickstarting the Disney Silver Age. So, in honor of this momentous milestone, well, I'll be doing something a bit different this time. I'll be reviewing this. Ta-da! It's a Disney Dark Ascension novel called The Wicked Ones, centered around Drusilla and Anastasia Tremaine, whom you might know as Cinderella's supposedly wicked stepsisters. Yep, Drusilla is the older one, and Anastasia is the red-haired one. Kind of obvious, but for new viewers of Disney, that's their names and that's their story. I won't go into too much. Well, actually, let's dive into what their character. Now that you know their names, let's see what their characters are like. Now, every Disney fan worth their salt knows that Anastasia would have gotten a redemption arc in the Cinderella's trilogy, made during the Disney direct-to-DVD era in the early 2000s. She falls in love with a baker, and ends up standing up to her stepmother, vice versa. But did you know that she actually had someone before the baker? I know, surprise twist. That's right. In the book, we get to see Anastasia and Drusilla's lives pan out, all living under the reign of their cruel, wicked stepmother, of their wicked mother, Lady Tremaine, who's the embodiment of cold-heartedness and child abuse. So, like I said, this video is not made for kids because it delves into the themes of child neglect, and psychological torment. So it's pretty dark stuff for a Disney book. But then again, Disney's never really been known to shy away from dark, heavy adult subject matter, because the trick to making a good Disney classic film is you got to incorporate the wacky humorous bits that the children will like, along with the subtle, mature subject matter that the adults will like. That way, both parties can enjoy revisiting this time after time after time after time. That's a trick that a very wise old clergyman once said during an interview when he wrote some of his books. So yeah. Anyway, the story starts off with Anastasia and Drusilla both living under the reign of their wicked mother, Lady Tremaine. But in this version, we get to discover that Anastasia actually had a lover before she met the baker in the third movie. His name was Dominic. He actually worked as a stable boy for the royal palace. He was, they say, tall, dark, and handsome, which is apparently her cup of tea, so to speak. The two of them got along splendidly together, and he was the one for Anastasia. He was the one that started it all. They'd have little secret rendezvous. They'd talk, they'd chat, and hell, they even shared their very first kiss. And for most, you never forget your first, especially if it's your first kiss. They even planned on running her story was that they were going to run off to Paris together and actually start like a first startup veterinary clinic in Paris, tending to horses. Hell, even Anastasia, believe it or not, was actually going to join the workforce, working in the paper mill, a steel mill of all places too, and that's very industrious. We never get to see that much of the sides of the two sisters. We only just know from the Disney movie that they were spoiled, rotten, callous bullies to the Cinderella. But as it turns out, this helps shed some light on the sisters, what their original characters were like, and dives a little deeper into what made them such spoiled, rotten bitches all the time. All this time, Lady Tremaine ended up screwed them over royally, and they took it out on their sister Ella because of this. So yeah, Anastasia would have met up with Dominic, and they would have run off to Paris together. In my opinion, now the ending, of course, is very, very dark, so I won't spoil the ending, but let's just say Lady Tremaine finally got her way and corrupted both of them, and just leave it at that. However, I felt the ending was too depressing, so I came up with my own ending. That includes Anastasia running off to Paris with Dominic via steam train, and yes, steam engines did exist in the time period of the book, apparently, because I thought it actually took place in the 1700s. Well, because let's be honest, if you've read one princess book or medieval fairy tale, you've practically read them all. But anyway, but I digress. The point being, Anastasia and Dominic would have run off to Paris and opened up their own startup veterinary clinic. And as around, they tended to all sorts of horses, sheep, cows, all sorts of pets and livestock. They would have lived happily together for 12 whole years before Dominic contracted an illness that was not yet to be cured and unfortunately died. Anastasia had been working part-time in the steel mills and workforces just to help pay for the startup clinic, and because she tried keeping the clinic going for a few months longer, but unfortunately, times were tough. So, and plus, with her beloved dead, she just didn't have the strength of will to go on. So she sold the clinic and ended up returning back to her original village and lived with Cinderella, who at the time was now married, is still married to the prince living in the castle. Right before they got married, and where Ella would eventually become coronated as queen. So Anastasia lived in the palace and worked alongside the servants, just doing various odd jobs for the next 2 years. She didn't mind this, of course, because she was used to the hard work. She, yeah, the Prince August Walker, who is known as Kit, and yes, that is his real name. I've seen bits and pieces of the 2015 live-action Cinderella movie. Great one, by the way, from what I hear. And both he and Ella watch Anastasia quietly doing her work. She feels very depressed and everything. She watches the other servants scuttle about with work, while she just tends to her jobs, mostly ignored. But the king, as you know from the third movie, kind of takes sympathy on Anastasia, gives her another father to pseudo daughter pep talk, and then sends her out. Then he and then later Ella send her out to do some errands on behalf of the king. She then goes into town, smells some fresh baked bread, runs into the baker, and the rest is history. So that's pretty much Anastasia's story. Now, what about Drusilla? That's right, the eldest daughter of the supposedly despicable duo. Turns out, and this book really does wonders of bolstering Drusilla's character up immensely. As it turns out, Drusilla actually has an affinity for science, mainly biology and astronomy. She even got to learn mathematics, script handwriting, and even the different phases of the moon. To me, this actually blew my mind because up until this point, I actually thought Drusilla was more of a background prop, for the story to happen. A background Disney villain sidekick, so to speak. Unlike those other characters like Mr. Smee, Iago, and vice versa, she didn't seem to have much of a personality outside this typical grumpy stuffy bully sort of vibe. But as it turns out, she cares very deeply for her sister. And when Ella was locked away in the tower, and yes, they did have a tower in the chateau, it's a whole different story of child abuse, believe it or not. She actually held Ella's hands underneath the door arch and comforted her. Actually helped her through the initial panic attack that Ella was having. Because her sister Anastasia was locked up in the tower first. It got so bad that Lady Tremaine ended up breaking her finger just from dragging her all the way up to the tower, kicking and screaming. And if you can imagine that in your head, then yes, it's exactly what you think it is. Anyway, Drusilla ended up finding a mentor figure called Madame Lambert. She was nice, a semi-elderly woman with a golden heart. She was the very thing that Drusilla needed most in this life. As a result, she ended up learning she took to biology and later astronomy like a duck takes to water. I was very flabbergasted. The fact, not because it was just, actually, but because it was just something different. The thing I love most about these books, even if they're what ifs, is shows the different sides of the characters, really bolstering and taking underrated characters and giving them a chance in the spotlight. Because, well, let's be honest, Cinderella's has been, done. Cinderella herself as a character has been done to death already. But if you do the characters that you'd think, oh, these guys won't have much character to them, well, guess what? You're wrong. Anyway, Drusilla is more than happy to be working alongside Madame Lambert. She learned a few phases of the moon, studied mathematics, and looked around and awed all the different plants and flora and fauna that were growing in the studio, or as they called it, the atelier, and everything. So and when Madame Lambert offered her the chance to go to the Sorbonne, which is I think a kind of a conservatorium in Paris, to work as her assistant, Drusilla was more than happy to jump on board. She was like, "Oh yes, please, yes please." So she had to forge a letter from Lady Tremaine. maid that gave her permission to go, but instead of writing something that, instead of forging a letter for using by remembering Lady Tremaine's mannerisms, she ended up writing the exact opposite of that by making her portrayed as a kinder, older, gentler woman instead of the cold-hearted, wicked monster that she already is. So that was kind of her first mistake. But you can actually. But again, she was still just eager and very young and stuff, and still had a lot to learn. Like I said, the ending of this book kind of sucked. So here's my take on how Drusilla's story should have ended. She and Madame Lambert would have gone to the Sorbonne via train, and then she would have lived happily. And unlike Drusilla, unlike Anastasia, who had experienced heartbreak after Dominic died, and didn't suffered no such heartbreak. She was as happy as could be. She worked in the laboratory, managing all of Madame Lambert's experiments, including the studies of flora and fauna, and even cataloging the different stars and multiple phases of the moon. Now you think. This is what makes me happy. Is like I'm a female scientist. Oh, I've always been a sucker for them because it just shows that expands that even in this age, intellect was still seeping into the lives and hearts and minds of many people who sought it out. And Drusilla, thankfully, was one of the best character studies, I believe. She worked in the laboratory, managing all sorts of the experiments. Even attended multiple symposiums and got to see many different people rush about in the city because she was just so sick and tired of being left. Even with the exception of Ella and Anastasia, it just felt quiet and alone. No one was ever really around at the chateau, and with Lady Tremaine around, I can't say I blame her. So yeah, anyway, she lived in Paris with Madame Lambert for many, many years, attended many symposiums, went to museums, saw different theater productions, all sorts of art, of intellectual culture that helped boost and grow her already budding intellectual curiosity. And if it was still probably around, she probably would have earned many a multiple doctorate, or even a bachelor's degree, or even about two PhDs in the matter. Now, can you imagine the supposed wicked stepsister in Disney's Cinderella actually having a bachelor's degree, doctorate, and two PhDs? It just goes to show people are allowed to be more than just one thing. It enables them to grow and evolve over time. And of the like. So anyway, after many years later, after Madame Lambert sadly passed away, Drusilla would then take on her mentor's last name, Drusilla Lambert, as a way to honor her and to distance herself from Lady Tremaine's legacy. Now you're probably wondering, well, to the two, but Rognificent, that's the YouTube channel. Rognificent, didn't you just say that Lady Tremaine had screwed over their dreams and their dreams and chances at an escape? And yes, he did. But in my version, Drusilla would have gotten the magic wand from Cinderella 3, A Stitch in Time, and used it to turn the wicked stepmother to stone, to match her stone heart. Now her outsides match her insides. Yep. Then, after relocating all of their prized possessions and stuff, especially from their stepfather's studies, Drusilla would have used the wand to destroy the chateau with a fiery fit of righteous fury, and especially destroying the tower. And to quote Magneto in X-Men 97, when she said, just before she destroyed the tower, she uttered the words, "Never again." Which definitely holds some weight to it in this context. She destroyed the entire chateau using the fairy godmother's magic wand. And yes, it may sound a bit ridiculous, but then again, compared to most of the stuff that's put in books these days, that just seems relatively tame. And the best part is, Lady Tremaine, in my version, would have been crushed her stone form would have been crushed and smashed to pieces under the flaming rubble, thus ending her reign of tyranny once and for all. Drusilla and then Anastasia would comfort Ella, then send her off to the ball to meet Prince Charming, just like in the original version, only this time she'd stay at the palace, thus ensuring that her future with Prince August Walker, aka Kit, would come to fruition, while they got to escape and finally live the lives that they so desperately and more than happily deserved. So yeah, it's definitely a much happier ending. Oh, and I also forgot to mention that Drusilla in her twilight years would also become a university professor. And the end of her story would conclude with good morning, class. Today you will be learning about the different phases of the moon and the different phases and parts of astronomy. My name is Professor Drusilla Lambert, and I shall be instructing you today. So yeah. All in all, that's pretty much their story. And at the ending of it all, both sisters, at least in my version, would have lived their own happily ever after. Just like in that old TV show Once Upon a Time, their main theme was basically redemption arcs and happily ever afters, especially when it came to the villains. That Anastasia's story especially taught me and probably everyone watching that even the worst of people can deserve a chance at romance and a second chance. All they have to do, they themselves just must really want it. So yeah, this is the Wicked Ones. It's fun. It even has a bit of Ella popping in every now and then, just showing her in the definitely a lot worse than what the Disney version has. But then again, it's portrayed in a more moderately realistic perspective. So yeah, this was definitely a great book to read. I've been a fan of the stepsisters, or at least Anastasia's case, not because she's a redhead, but because she was the one that kickstarted my fascination with villain redemption arcs. When done properly, of course. It can indicate natural growth, and it's rewarding to invest all these time in to see all the time you've invested in these characters finally pay off. Yep. Hell, even 75 years later, each of the Disney princess mythos never stops growing, especially in the ways of their world building. So yeah, this was The Wicked Ones by Robin Benway. I highly recommend you pick this up at your local bookstore or on Amazon Books. So yeah, this was definitely a great book to read. It's a great character study into what makes these characters tick the way they are. It's both psychologically and from a storytelling perspective. And dare I say, it's much more real. It's like fairy tale endings don't normally happen in real life, but then again, the build up to it does seem a bit more realistic, if you get what I mean, of course. So yes. Anyway, this is a relatively short episode today, but there was a lot to unpack from this book. So yeah. Anyway, tune in next time. When I'll be reviewing something extra special. We'll be going back to the world into the Marvel universe for a brand new issue featuring two dynamic characters that we've been waiting to see for the last few years. Until next time, true believers, Excelsior.